Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you for the invitation. I've been overwhelmed by the kindness shown to me by the people in Japan since I arrived last week, so thank you very much for that. So I work for Sellafield Limited, which is one of the operating companies in the UK, and I'm going to speak a little bit about the NDA to give some context as well. The Nuclear Decommissioning Authority has been spoken about a few times today. In the UK, the NDA was set up by the Energy Act 2004, and the NDA is charged with, on behalf of government, to clean up the UK's earliest nuclear sites safely, securely and cost-effectively. I'll come back to cost-effectively in my presentation around Sellafield Limited because there are different definitions of value, and we'll talk about social impact and social value later on in my presentation. A key part of this Energy Act was around working with the communities around decommissioning sites to make sure that this was done with a care for the future for the communities and making sure that the environment is at the heart of the NDA work across the UK. Obviously, there are a lot of challenges across some significant sites in the UK. 17 nuclear sites, and the decommissioning agenda is to make sure that those sites are left in a condition for their next use. So the NDA owns one of the largest nuclear decommissioning and remediation programs in Europe. It's a significant piece of work, and the main priority is to lead the work across the NDA group and develop a strategy for how it should be carried out. The NDA also supports government's aspiration for the UK to be a global leader in the civil nuclear sector. We talk about best value for the UK taxpayer, and that's focusing on reducing the highest hazards and risks whilst ensuring safe, secure and environmentally responsible operations at our sites. We'll hear a little bit about sustainability, and we'll hear about the UN Sustainable Development Goals as well as part of my presentation in a while. But the environment is obviously a very key part of the work that the NDA undertakes. And also by generating revenue through commercial activities, looking to reduce levels of public funding as well. So we've had a 75, 80-year period of a nuclear landscape in the UK, and this has evolved over many decades and under obviously many different approaches to the nuclear industry over a long period of time as well, and the NDA is there to deal with that legacy. The 17 sites across the UK reflect this, and it's got the first fleet of nuclear power stations, it's got research centres, fuel-related facilities and Sellafield, which importantly has the largest radioactive inventory and the most complex facilities to decommission. I work for Sellafield Limited, and I'll talk a bit about our social impact work that comes alongside that decommissioning work as well. One of the key things around decommissioning, it will take more than 100 years to complete the core mission of nuclear cleanup and waste management, with an ultimate goal to achieve the end state at all sites by 2125. And when we talk about decommissioning, I think this is important as well. We also must see decommissioning as an opportunity. There are not many businesses, either in the UK or around the world, that has such a long time frame in front of it in terms of planning, whether that's for skills, whether that's for the community involvement. So there are also positives that come out of decommissioning and not just negatives. So the NDA is publicly funded through government, through BASE, which is our government department, and the expenditure is voted upon annually by Parliament. Now this gives some challenges because we have annual site funding limits, so every year government will decide how much the sites get across the UK. And when you look at the total there, 3.05 billion is spent in the year. Significant part of that is at Sellafield Limited. In terms of our budget per year, it's £2.345 billion. So it's a significant part of that UK cost. There is income there, but also what that means is a net total of 2.447 billion, which is funded by the government. So because it's government money, that brings with it its own challenges, and it also, in an economic environment that we've seen post-COVID, it becomes even more challenging. And with some of the issues around the war in Europe and so on, it becomes even more challenging than that. So in terms of public funding, you may have seen some of the issues in the UK around the public finances even in the last sort of 2 to 3 months. So it's quite a challenging environment. So the NDA delivers its mission through site licence companies and subsidiaries, and the NDA's role is to support those sites, operating companies and employees to optimise delivery and manage performance by providing group leadership, focus and governance. The NDA supports research and development and seeks innovation and work to standardise and simplify processes. So in terms of the innovation, I have colleagues from the NDA with me today, and Japan is a very important part of that partnership now and in the future. This is a really important part of the work that I do in terms of social value and social impact. Over 50% of the NDA budget is spent in the supply chain. The NDA needs to support a supply chain that's dynamic, creative, and is able to meet the current and future decommissioning needs for decades to come. So that means that there is a very close relationship between the operating companies and its supply chain, and that will become even more important over the years. SMEs in the UK are a really important part of our business, and the NDA is very proud that small and medium enterprises, we spend about 33% of our supply chain budget, and that brings with it innovation, technology, and obviously value for money as well, which is, as I said earlier, a massively important part of our mission. The NDA is also reconnecting the sector with academia, other industries and other countries seeking decommissioning solutions. So it is an open approach to the challenges that the UK finds in its nuclear industry. It took me 19 hours to get to Japan, but everywhere I go in the world I realise how small the world is. The challenges are so similar. We heard about the challenges in the US, some of the challenges that we heard about over lunch in Japan. The world is so small in terms of, the issues and the challenges and the opportunities. So one of the most important things for us is to ensure that our people have the right skills. We talk about that long-term mission over 100 years. We have a real opportunity to strengthen and develop skills. So in the UK, the NDA's operating companies are very strong in the apprenticeships in terms of STEM subject, so that's the sort of mathematics and the sciences, but also increasingly with the arts as well. So we talk a lot about STEM engagement, but increasingly we talk about STEAM. So we add in arts because the challenges that we face in the nuclear industry, we need people to think about things in a slightly different way. And sometimes with the arts, that is a really different approach to challenges as well. In the UK, there's something called the Nuclear Sector Deal. So the NDA has aligned its approach with national initiatives, and that's around apprentices, skills gaps, subject matter experts, technical and professional skills, importantly transferability and mobility, and as I said, STEM engagement. The transferability of skills is massively important, and having a workforce that is mobile and agile, even within Sellafield Limited, as decommissioning progresses, is massively important. So part of the NDA socioeconomic mission is to support the maintenance of sustainable communities. As I said earlier, I'll talk a little bit about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but the NDA has 4 objectives: to enhance the opportunity for local people to be involved in decommissioning work. We have a saying in the UK that a rising tide lifts all boats. So that is to make sure that whatever your background or your circumstance, you can access the fantastic decommissioning work that is there for a long term at Sellafield. So that is sometimes around the work that I do in the community around upskilling and looking at levels of attainment in schools and so on. The NDA also looks around the diversification of local economies into other sectors. When I get onto my part around Sellafield Limited, we have an approach where we want to diversify so there is not an over-reliance on nuclear, but at the same time sweat the asset of nuclear. As I said earlier, the amount of money that is going through the Sellafield system is so considerable that it would be crazy not to sweat that asset in terms of the local economy. Looking to increase the attractiveness of areas near NDA sites, and also working with other organisations to maximise potential benefits to the community. I'll talk later on in the presentation around trusted partners and the work that we do as a business with our trusted partners in the community. So that brings us on to my area of work, which is the Sellafield Social Impact Strategy, and that is called 6, Social Impact Multiplied. It was agreed by the Sellafield Limited board and the NDA board around 6 years ago. So I've been with the Sellafield Limited for 5 years, heading up this programme. So if I can give you some Sellafield Limited context. So we're in the west of Cumbria, up in the northwest of England. And when I talk about West Cumbria, there are 2 local authorities, Allerdale and Copeland, and that is what we call West Cumbria, and that is our area of priority. So that is the area around the Sellafield site. So from a Sellafield perspective, primary objective is to deliver the Sellafield mission in terms of clean-up and decommissioning. But wherever possible, we want to do that in a way that helps the local economy to become more resilient and reduces reliance on Sellafield Limited. There's 11,500 people that work at Sellafield Limited, so it is a large economic actor in the region. And that brings with it challenges, and it brings with it opportunities as well. So when we started on the journey with Social Impact Multiplied, I think one of the previous speakers talked about basing things on fact. So what we wanted to do was we commissioned a report to understand the health of the local economy in West Cumbria. And you'll see here how significant the Sellafield site is to West Cumbria. It provides almost 59% of all jobs in Copeland, so that is the area immediately around the site. There are 2 sites with Sellafield Limited. One is in West Cumbria, and there is an engineering office in Risley in Warrington, about 2.5 hours south. One Sellafield Limited job sustains 3 in the rest of the economy, and you can see there the Copeland and Allerdale benefits from the Sellafield Limited wage bill. And £1.2 billion is spent in the supply chain. So that is a really significant amount of economic activity that goes through the Sellafield site. But the economic outlook for Cumbria is quite challenging. Although we've got those average salaries which are quite high, there are pockets of deprivation quite close to the site as well. We say in the UK, the haves and the have-nots. It's very, very specific to West Cumbria that there are areas of affluence next to real poverty, and areas that are in the top 10 indices in the UK in terms of deprivation. We've probably got 2 or 3 areas in West Cumbria. So there is some real challenging geography, and there's some real challenging outlooks. So that over-reliance on Sellafield Limited at times brings unique challenges. Decommissioning will touch most aspects of life in that local economy. But industrial change is a feature of modern economies, and successfully managing change is lengthy, intensive and difficult. So because of that long-term decommissioning programme of work, the work that we do with Social Impact Multiplied is based on the long term, and I'll talk a little bit about where we transitioned from 5-6 years ago to the work that we do now. And it demonstrated a shift in thinking, and it was a significant shift. So when the NDA came into existence in 2004, even at that time, so my budget per year is £10 million out of a £15 million NDA budget for the whole of the UK. So it is a significant chunk of the socio-economic funding. But a lot of the historic activities were based around being uncoordinated, not having a real strategy to the investments. It was immediate or short-term focused, often without ongoing commitment. So we would fund things and then move on to the next thing, and then we'd move on to the next thing. Often for short-term gain, often single activities, and input focused, and sometimes, quite frankly, for PR opportunities. With the move towards Social Impact Multiplied, what we wanted to do is we wanted to look at root cause. We wanted to look at all of our activity is part of an overall programme of work, and they are all interlinked. And I'll come on to the objectives in Social Impact Multiplied in a while. Part of long-term partnerships with the community. There is always a risk with a large economic actor that its community work becomes arrogant because it is so large, because it employs so many people, because there are so many people in the community that are either reliant on Sellafield or family members are. There is always the danger that the company knows best. And in terms of social value and social impact, that is absolutely incorrect. We are part of the solution, and we can input our views and our ideas, but we're not the only part of that solution, and we're not the only organisation that knows best. We wanted it to become outcome focused, and we wanted to make sure that we worked in long-term partnership with external organisations and the community. So in terms of social impact, just to make a definition of that, so this is the effect that our organisation, Sellafield Limited's actions, have on the well-being of our local community. We have the ability to create permanent, positive and significant change through our deliberate activities. So it's not about reacting to or fixing immediate problems, taking single issues, or pursuing short-term activities. That CSR approach, corporate social responsibility, that I talked about in the previous slide. So I have a small team of about 6 or 7 people. I've got a master's degree in economic development. So for the company to employ a team of people that were entirely focused on the community and entirely focused on delivering social value from our activities is part of the NDA's DNA. Because of the Energy Act and that supplemental responsibility for the communities around the sites and the community well-being, that is a direct consequence of the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority's view on social impact in the UK. And my work is replicated across the other sites as well. So we have a team of people that come together every month who do the work that me and my team do in the community, and we work together to share best practice, to look at the issues. And because of the geography of our sites, they tend to be fairly similar. So we can work on that best practice and we can look at potential solutions. They may need tweaked for the different geographical areas, but there is often a coordinated approach that can be taken. And I think that's really important as well in terms of having 17 sites. to have a coordinated approach where there is coordination of measurement and evaluation as well is very important. It's not to standardise the process, but it's to make sure that the impact of the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority's work is felt right across the UK around its sites. So as I said, I've got an annual social impact budget of £10 million, but that is small change if we look at the amount of money that goes through Sellafield Limited, and if we get it right in terms of business decisions that maximise social value, if we get it right in terms of supply chain spend, so through procurement and collaboration with the supply chain, we can make far more difference than we can just with a chunk of money. The money is massively important, and it helps us to do so many things, and it helps us to, for example, prior to me joining Sellafield Limited, the NDA, Sellafield Limited and the local authorities actually built a new school in West Cumbria. There was a decaying school there that the attainment wasn't great, so it helped with governorship within the school, but it also built a new school as well. So the money can make a real difference, but where we can make the biggest difference is through the multiplication effect of working with our partners in the community and in the supply chain as well. So you'll see at the bottom there, the sixth strategy, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, when we wrote it, was built upon UN Sustainable Development Goals. Now, that is a massive part of the strategy. If we look at, gender equality, access to good work, access to quality education, health and well-being, those are the fundamental underpinnings of the work that we do in our social impact work. This is what we call our FAN. It's the 5 steps around the work that we do. So we've got a lot of different activities in our programme of work, but every one of them is underpinned by this. We want to target our resources to seek long-term solutions. So that change in thinking from that sticking plaster solution to that, right, what can we do when we look at the reports that we commission? What can we do to move it from A to B, to move the dial and the pendulum to a better place in terms of the local community, whether that be in skills, economic development, or even the fabric of the community as well, which I'll talk about in a little while. That enables us to target our resources. Although I've got a team, resource is limited. The needs are many, the demands are many. And that's when I talk about the next part of this FAN, stakeholder and partnership working. We've heard a lot about it today, and it's actually really difficult to undertake, but the rewards are massive. And 5 or 6 years ago, we didn't do that. We had the view that we'll do this set of activities because we think that will be the best thing for the community. We've flipped that on its head. We now work hand in hand with the community. And when I talk about the community, that can be anyone from local authorities, so the councils. It can be economic development agencies in the area. It can be charities in the area, so different organisations. Because what we found during the COVID pandemic, that it wasn't business that stepped up. It wasn't the supply chain that stepped up. It wasn't Sellafield that stepped up immediately because we're large and we can sometimes be cumbersome. It was the community. It was the people in the streets who stepped up and said, right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to deliver food parcels to the elderly in our community. We're going to deliver protective equipment. Right, in March 2020, we saw a mass mobilisation of our community at a street level. So what we want to do is we want to take the voice of those in the community who know their community the best to work on collective impact. An important part of the work that we do is we have £10 million, but what we want to do is we want to leverage that, so seek further investment from others. Now, sometimes that's financial, but sometimes it's resource as well. So it could be volunteering from companies, it could be professional expertise for charities, for example, on project management or financial matters or marketing. So we want to leverage and really push as much as we can to maximise the impact of the work that we do. So whenever we fund any project or whenever we take part in any project with our resources, we actively look for further funding or resource. Now, because of the area that we're in, sometimes that is government, so it's other areas of government, but it makes our £10 million go further. So it's a really important part of the work that we do. We want our interventions to be sustainable. It's really important that when we intervene either financially or with resource, that we can work on it for multi-years. But if we do leave that project, what we leave behind is sustainable. So when we do a lot of work with the community, we talk about the fabric of the community. So citizens' advice bureaus or charities that help the elderly or youth work. We're working very closely to help them with their strategies so that they are sustainable for the longer term as well. So they're not just reliant on funding, they're not just reliant on putting in bids for funding to keep them in existence. We actually put in people either from our business or from other parts of the community to help with their strategies and their long-term strategies, because the sustainable element is a really important part of social impact multiplied. And lastly on the FAN, and again really important, it's got to be measurable. In the past, before we made this switch to this step change, a lot of the things that we did we couldn't really measure, so we thought they might be successful, or it gave us a feel-good factor, but we couldn't actually measure whether they were successful or not. So now, with any funding of activity or when we put resource into activity, from the outset, we measure from the beginning. So we measure that baseline, and then we measure what the outcomes are at the end. And that could be 3, 5, 7, but we stay with the project and we measure it as we go along. And we measure to optimise, because what we want to do, we want to get the most bang from our bucks. And we want to make sure that where we put our money or our resource is maximising the social value of that intervention. So it's an important part of the process. But we don't do it just with the organisation. We actually put people in to independently verify that as well. And what that does, it gives a mindset either in the external organisation or with my team that you're going to be externally verified. So there can't be any BS. There's got to be real demonstration of change. So our social impact strategy is linked to the Sellafield Limited corporate strategy, and that's to provide our communities and taxpayers with a socio-economic growth return on their investment at Sellafield. I mentioned earlier about a different definition of value. It's a constant push from me and my team, whether it's in our procurement teams, to look at value in a different way. Not just see it as pounds and pennies, but to look at it from a social value perspective. It's more difficult, and when you're in an annual funding round, when you're looking at real big demands on that, the funding constraints we have as a site, it's very difficult sometimes to change that mindset. But luckily, within Sellafield Limited, we have a commercial team that is very strong on sustainability. Just in terms of sustainability, 3 pillars of sustainability: social, economic and environment. The work that I concentrate on is the 2 pillars of the social and the economic. We also have a team that looks after the environmental elements of sustainability as well. Over time, I think they'll come together, but at the moment they work jointly, but in different teams. The social impact strategy has 5 objectives, and it's supported by an enabling objective. You can see there, if you want to look, further details can be found in the strategy. Resilient economies, thriving communities and sustainable incomes. So resilient economies is around diversification. It's around also sweating the asset, around the making sure that the pounds that go through Sellafield, we maximise that value. A resilient economy can be inside and outside of nuclear. So, for example, I'll show you some examples of the diversification work that we're undertaking in West Cumbria over the last 2 years. Sustainable incomes is around skills and education. The sustainable incomes element of our strategy isn't just altruistic, so it isn't just about giving to the community. It's also making sure that the local community is skilled and educated the best that it can be, because we have a 100-year programme and more activity of work, so we need a skilled workforce. So there is a dual reason. Now, some people in our community at the moment cannot access work at Sellafield Limited. And when I talked earlier about a rising tide lifts all boats, what we do there is we work with those that might need extra assistance in terms of that educational journey, to make sure that because of their background or their geography, they're not barred from working at Sellafield, or they're not barred from working in the supply chain or outside of the nuclear industry as well. So we do a lot of work in education outreach, and also we fund education programs as well, which I'll talk a little bit in a moment. Thriving communities. When I came into the job, the community element was probably the least strong in terms of our approach. Without a thriving community, you can't have a thriving business. It's as simple as that. Without things to do in the evening, without things to do at the weekends, without a social fabric in the community, you're on a hiding to nothing. So what we do is we work with those elements in the community that are a safety net for some people. So whether that's, as I said earlier, around age, youth, health. COVID-19 really amplified some of the health and well-being issues that we found in some elements of our community. So some of the work that we do in our Thriving Communities objective is around financing mental health assistance. What we can't do is we can't fund things that are funded by other government departments, but what we can do is, if it's got added value or it wouldn't get done, we can then finance that. So they call it low-level mental health provision. I think last year we put £1.7 million into a programme of work that was working with those who had mental health problems before they hit crisis, so before they got into the system. And it's particularly working with charities in West Cumbria around that, because one of the government initiatives is around COVID recovery in the UK, and one of those initiatives is around mental health. We're seeing real mental health challenges, as you all will be aware. You know, staying in your home for 2 years, some people losing their jobs. It was a real difficult time for the world. In the UK, it has sort of sparked a mental health crisis that the government is now looking to address. So post-COVID recovery is a big part of our UK government agenda. The big difference in this social impact strategy, and the reason it's called Social Impact Multiplied, is around the collective impact and social value chains. And that is around harnessing the supply chain. It's around working with our supply chain who want to do the right thing in our communities. It's about helping them. We call it plug and play, almost off-the-shelf activities. So because we've been through a 5-year journey where we know what the local need is, we say to our supply chain, put your shoulder behind the work that we're doing, and together the collective impact of that can be far bigger than Sellafield Limited acting alone. And it's very, very powerful. It's difficult and it's time-consuming. But when you look at the amount of companies that are in the Sellafield Limited supply chain, for them to get their shoulder behind the work that we do in the community is massively impactful. and it's something that is probably the major part of social impact multiplied. It's looking at how we maximise that effect. And from a social value chain perspective, that co-creation with the community, we're not the experts. We can be part of the solution, but we're not the experts. There are people in the community that are the experts. So we work with local partners, trusted partners, who we have a local community foundation that works in the charity and third sector around the fabric of the community. So we fund that body, we sit on the board, and we work together on solutions in our area, West Cumbria. We also work with local authorities as well. So when we made this switch, this change to social impact multiplied, what we wanted to do through our social value chains was work with our local authority partners. So the councils that the members are elected to represent the community. So we work with those guys. It can be difficult and challenging at times because there is a political element to what they do. So there is a political element to the projects that they want to see funded. But what we've been able to do is work over 5 years on trust, mutual trust. And that has been a really important part of our strategy. We say no to the community more than we say yes, but they trust us and we trust them and we understand each other. And that's important in terms of our body of work, because our body of work can only be effective if it is co-created with the community. If we don't co-create it with the community, it's our idea, it's our view of what the community needs, and that is arrogant and ultimately unsuccessful. You won't be able to see this slide, but everything that we do has a reason, and everything we do has a framework to it. So we underpin our activity with what we call a social impact framework. And we try to understand and describe in a one slide or a one-pager why we do things. So if you look at the right, that's probably the most important part for this conversation. So we've got our UK government and external drivers. We've got the NDA and SL corporate strategies. We've got the 6 strategy vision, which flow into the 6 objectives, which flow into priorities of work. We then look at the outcomes of those priorities, we measure and we evaluate those, and we constantly check how these align to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So we're always constantly checking everything that we do, and we don't do anything unless there is a sensible outcomes framework to that activity, and unless we can look at that right-hand column there and say, yes, it hits those. Because what that allows us to do is we work with our external colleagues in the community. They know this, they work to that as well, and they know that they have to align to our strategy. That's not because of arrogance, it's because it gives us a framework of activity to undertake. So it has helped us in our relationship with our local stakeholders, in that we have just as we've been through a 2-3 year period of work around getting our strategy right, it enables us to ask the community what they want. You know, what is your strategy for this area? So that's a really important relationship between us and the community, because we know that when we talk to them, they've thought it through, they understand where they can access activity through Sellafield Limited, whether it's resource or whether it's through funding. And it's a really key piece of work that my team undertakes. Again, I want, you've got it in the slide pack, so if you look at, we always work on the outcome. What is the outcome that we want to achieve? So then we talk about what the objective is about, and do we have any enablers? So this is really important, because sometimes, for example, pre-COVID, Sellafield Limited had an accommodation plan, which was around, if we need office space, where is the best place to put that office? Now, as part of that consideration, social impact was considered. So Albion Square, where I work in Whitehaven, which is in the centre of Copeland, was put in Whitehaven because there was a social impact consideration for having an office space of 1,000 people in the centre of town, and the effect that that would have on the town in terms of, you know, people popping out for their lunch or do their laundry or whatever it might be. So we always look at the enablers as well. And then when we look at our priorities, these are our priorities so far on this: develop the local economic infrastructure. I'll talk in a little while about some of the things that we've done in terms of diversifying and developing the infrastructure. So just a couple of examples of the work that we've done. When we look at local economic inequalities, what we want to do is use growth in the nuclear sector to drive new economic opportunities. I said earlier about sweating the assets. So £1.2 billion supply chain spend, that salary bill that people are spending in their local communities, it is a significant economic actor. We want to create new investment. We want to attract new investment. We talk about knowledge, ideas, innovation, capability, resources, but importantly, they contribute to a more inclusive and distributed local economy. So not any of those things just for the sake of it, not any of those things just for delivery of our decommissioning mission at Sellafield Limited, but to also look at where it can. Not everything can, but to look at where we can contribute to that more inclusive economy. So on the top right ish is, it's basically a business cluster. So it's taking the engineering activity from Sellafield Limited, taking it outside the fence into an area called Cleatamore, which has got some economic issues, but also by making the Sellafield Limited engineering capability visible, accessible, building a cluster around them, whether it's academia, whether it's inward investment. So again, we're looking to sweat the asset, but also diversify the economy. There are a lot of nuclear companies in our supply chain that are active in other areas. It could be water, it could be utilities, it could be civil engineering. We want to maximise the ability of West Cumbria to help those companies deliver. The middle photograph there is, it's actually 20 years derelict bus station in the centre of Whitehaven. Before this, there was no roof on. All it had was birds flying around inside, and it was derelict, on the verge of falling down. So we now have in there an office and something called an Eagle Lab, which is has 3D printing, what we call a maker space, so people can do, if they have an idea, they can go there and 3D print it. There's mentorship, there's entrepreneur support, there's banking support, marketing support. So if you've got a business, doesn't matter how old you are, you can be a retiree or you can be straight out of school, you can access the facilities in there to grow your business. And our aim is for small businesses to grow and then be kicked out into other office space around the area and to have a constant churn of economic activity, not just in nuclear. At the bottom there is something called The Edge, and this is a water sports centre. So when I talked about diversification, we're on the coast and we have the potential for significant sporting activity as well as tourist activity. It's the start of something called the Coast to Coast, where you can bike from one side of the UK to the other. So this will enable water sports, whether it's canoeing, windsurfing, to access the natural elements of our area in West Cumbria. I talked about working with partners and community assets. So you'll see there on the top is something called a sea bin in Whitehaven Harbour. It's basically a bin that sucks litter out of the harbour, and we've got the most sea bins, even more than Sydney Harbour, in a small town called Whitehaven. There's 8 of those in. So what we try to do is do something for the environment, but more importantly for me is the people who work on the sea bins go out into local schools and talk to them about, right, if you litter, we're in a valley, that litter will end up in the sea. It will end up in the harbour. So we do a programme of educational work as well that helps us to not just talk about the environment, but have some pride in the area in which we live. Some areas of the UK can be quite litter-ridden. What we want to be is we want to be a really clean area that thinks about its environment, that doesn't pollute the sea. Again, looking at the UN Sustainable Development Goals. It's only a small programme, but it's quite an important one because we go out into all of the schools in West Cumbria. Again, I talked about social value chains, so I won't go too much into this one. But we work with local leadership organisations. One of the things that we want to do is make sure that we're fit for the future, to make sure that our young people have the leadership qualities to take on the mantle from old, fat individuals like me. I'm old and I'm on my way out. It's about the kids that we'll meet tomorrow, that, you know, they're the ones that are far more important in terms of our programme. But what we want to do as well is we want to help them. We want to develop their leadership capability so that they have a real, true voice in our community. Work is changing. We were talking at lunch about March 2020 when we all went home. I didn't go back to the office for 2 years. Work is changing, and it will continue to change. So our sustainable income objective is about helping job seekers and students to secure an income now and in the future, but an income that is the best income that they can get around their capabilities, their interests, their needs. And this is pretty important because we've got something called the WELL project. And what this does, it is in every school in West Cumbria, and this was jointly developed with the NDA and the local education authority, where we target individual pupils in schools who perhaps have less attainment than their peers, and we have a targeted programme of support for those individual pupils in the schools. It's a significant piece of work, and it's something that will be for the long term. So we started it 3 years ago. My view is that that will continue, if it continues to deliver, for as long as there is social impact funding through Sellafield Limited, because it is really important that whatever your background, your circumstance, or your geographical placement in West Cumbria, you should not be barred from good quality work, because people have all kinds of individual issues in their home lives. They could be the brightest students, but they might have such challenging home lives that they need support to be the best version of themselves. So again, collective impact. We work very closely and we collaborate. Everyone talks about collaboration. It's really difficult to do. It's got to be sustained. It takes a long time. It can go forwards, then it can go backwards. But the key thing in terms of our social impact work is it's a commitment, and a long-term commitment to working with our community and our trusted partners. We focus on our objectives, and we look at our assets, and we look at where they can have the most impact. As you know, I talked about the social impact framework there. Where can we get the most impact? Now, there are some times where a small impact can be really, really magnificently big. So we don't, you know, it isn't a one-size-fits-all. We are flexible, and we do look at our work flexibly. The enabler for all of this is improving performance. We want to collect information and use it to continually improve. And what we do is we pay for that information, but we share it with our employees, our partners, our stakeholders, and our communities. So if we get in a consultant to do a piece of work like the economic impact of Sellafield, we did that in June 17. It's just been updated. It's quite a significant cost, but what we do is we share it with the community. And we say, this is our work, but it's also your work. The top one there, West Cumbria Opportunities and Challenges, we're just about to refresh that as well. Everything I do, I want to be based on fact. and evidence, because I've got so many opinions on everything, but they're just my opinions, and they could be wrong. So what we do is we make sure everything is based on fact. So just to reflect, it isn't charity, it isn't PR, it isn't corporate social responsibility. It's around maximising our over £2 billion. £2.345 billion go through Sellafield's site every year. We must maximise the benefit of that for our employees, for our community, and for our children and their grandchildren. It's also been adopted across the NDA estate. I talked earlier about maximising and making sure that the work that we do across the 17 sites isn't standardised, but has a standardisation to it. So when we talk about measurement and evaluation, we're taking that across the NDA estate. And the reason we do that is because some of our communities are the same, so they will benefit from that work, but also because the supply chain can access work at other sites across the UK. If there is a standard approach, if there is a standard socio-economic policy or strategy, businesses can say, right, I know what the NDA and Sellafield Limited or some of the other sites in the UK want from their social impact. So we now have a 10% evaluation in procurement. So everything that we let for site, there's a 10% evaluation on social impact. So now companies, it's a real differentiator for companies. So they want to put in the best bid, and they want to put in the best social impact bid, because it can actually be a differentiator, like cost is, or safety, or project management. And that's been a real boost to us in terms of our relationship with the supply chain, because they can see what we want to see, and we can see from them a standardised approach. And when I talked earlier about the plug and play off the shelf, there are things in our programme of work that a supply chain company can come into West Cumbria and immediately plug into, and from day one start maximising the effect of that project. It isn't a case of we sit around for 3-6 months scratching our heads and figuring out what we need to do. They can just plug in and go from day one, and that's a really, really powerful thing. So what we want to do is develop and strengthen the supply chain in terms of particularly around SMEs and particularly around local SMEs. So making sure that local companies, I mentioned the ISH project, so that's around inward investment. So it isn't just about the indigenous companies in West Cumbria, it's about attracting new companies to West Cumbria to access work at Sellafield Limited, and then hopefully for our community to access work in other areas of the UK or even internationally. We want to improve access to good jobs outside of Sellafield Limited. When you have 11,500 people who work at Sellafield, probably another 5,000 people in the supply chain, that can be healthy and unhealthy at the same time. We've got a long period of work ahead of us, 100 years and more. It allows us to plan. It allows us to plan around skills, but sometimes it can lead to a sense of comfort that we've actually got a long time to go at this. Well, actually, the sooner we can get that diversification into place, the better it will be for the community. So look at decommissioning also as a positive. It's long term, we can plan. There's a lot of money that goes through Sellafield Limited, so it is a positive, but it will come to an end in the future, and let's make sure that our community is in the strongest place it can be to deal with that future. We want to address inequalities in education, so that is everything from providing governors into schools, to building new schools, to working with those pupils that need extra assistance, and that will also help us as well in terms of our recruitment of our future workforce. We want supplies to grow non-SL business in West Cumbria, and we want to reduce the rate of economic inactivity. As I said earlier, there are pockets of deprivation next to pockets of affluence, and we want to, the UK government calls it levelling up. We've been doing levelling up for 5, 6, 7 years, where we want to, that rising tide lifts all boats. So in conclusion, we want to embed social impact into everything we do, and we want to secure a sustainable legacy from the resources and investments at Sellafield Limited. It's a fantastic program to work on. It's every day is different, every day is challenging, but every day I go home and with our trusted colleagues in the community, we're making difference every day. So it's a fantastic place to work. The NDA allow us, they set the strategy and they allow us to go off and do it. So it's a fantastic piece of work that we do. So thank you for your time. Thank you for the invitation. And I've really enjoyed my time in your beautiful country.
Thank you very much. It's a very comprehensive presentation. So we have 3 questions from the internet audience. The first one is a little bit basic question. Your organization, NDA, is a non-governmental public body, so maybe very closely to the national government. Her question is, what is the preferable attitude from the usual residents or local community? So what is a preferable approach from the residents or the local community?
Okay, so in terms of the local community, it's been a nuclear area for 75, 80 years, so there is a strong acceptance of nuclear. There are some anti-nuclear elements there, and thankfully there is, because there has to be a tension between pro and anti. But for the most part, because of the opportunities and the economic wealth that is brought to the area over a sustained period of time, and also into the future, there is an acceptance of nuclear. There is they are very comfortable in terms of the safety record of the site and so on. Absolutely no issues. I live 6 miles from site. It's a beautiful area to work, and there is a huge acceptance of nuclear.
And the second question is about supply chain. You talked about almost 1/3 of budget is given to the small or medium enterprises. His question is, how high is the percentage of local enterprises to the total SME?
So it moves, and it moves around. I think the last time it was looked at was probably around 22%. So in the UK, the SME agenda is a UK-wide agenda. So that doesn't matter whether you're in West Cumbria or London or Oxford. So the SME agenda in the UK is a national agenda. What we do from a social impact perspective is we work with local small companies to make sure, sometimes they have to join with other companies to bid for work. So we help facilitate that in terms of our work with the supply chain. There is a strong SME supply chain team within Sellafield Limited that is constantly out working with the smaller companies in the supply chain, working on industrial liaison between larger companies and smaller companies. So making sure that the opportunities are visible, which is a key part of the work that they do. So it's what we don't want to do is we don't want to say it has to be local, because local is good. That is that can only lead one way. So what we say is we want our local companies to be able to compete on the national agenda. So we turn it the other way around. But there is a strong local SME presence, and things like ISH. So that bringing out engineering and the clustering around our engineering, that will also help, because small SMEs will join the West Cumbrian community to access the opportunity and the work as well.
Okay. I have another two questions. The first one is very specific. Do you have any specific way to disposal of the waste from Sellafield decommissioning?
That's outside of my expertise, so I will leave that for someone else.
Okay. Okay, another one is maybe, so the reprocessing plant is very specific to UK, France, and Germany, or Japan, and US. Do you have any connections with these countries about the reprocessing plant decommissioning? Maybe.
Decommissioning, yes. So previously I worked for Arriva in France. So there is a strong collaboration between the French and an increasing collaboration here in Japan. So I think, as I said earlier, in terms of the world being very small, I think one of the things for the NDA, and I won't speak for the NDA because I work for Sellafield Limited, but their view of the world is that, you know, they want to be an active partner with decommissioning activity around the world, because the NDA can learn and we can also pass on knowledge as well. So I think it's around that global partnership. But yes, there is a strong link between the UK, France, and also Japan.
Thank you. So, thank you very much. So, ちょっと質問がたくさんありましたので、次へ進みたいと思います。Thank you very much. We have a lot of questions for you. Thank you very much.